The rain in Rainport, Massachusetts, wasn't just water, it was a punishment. It fell in icy, relentless sheets, turning the city into a smear of bleeding neon and slick, black asphalt. For me, it was a baptism by humiliation. The glass door of the gilded plate slammed shut, the sound a final, definitive crack of judgment. One moment I was a waitress, the next I was just out. Cast out into the deluge that matched the storm inside my chest. My manager, Mr. Davies, hadn't even raised his voice. That was the worst part. His tone was one of weary disappointment, as if my refusal to be groped by a city councilman's drunk nephew was a personal failing, a stain on his carefully curated establishment. Our VIPs have certain expectations. Mara, he'd said, his eyes flicking to the door. If you can't meet them, you can't work here. The security guard, a hulking man named Stan, who'd once asked me for my number, didn't meet my eyes as he escorted me out, but I heard his snicker as the lock clicked behind me. My uniform, a tissue-thin polyester blouse and black slacks, was soaked through in seconds. It clung to my skin like a second, colder layer of shame. I hugged my worn backpack to my chest, its frayed straps digging into my shoulders. It contained everything I had in the world: a change of clothes, a half-eaten granola bar, and a textbook on forensic accounting I could no longer afford. I huddled under the sputtering, half-lit sign of the Eider Street Market, a pathetic excuse for an awning. The flickering red light painted my face in a sickly, pulsing glow. My hand, shaking from cold and fury, pulled out my phone. The screen was a spider web of cracks, but the notification was brutally clear. Overdraft fee. Applied. Account balance. $47.32. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. A puff of steam instantly devoured by the rain, of course. That's when the cars came. Not just any cars. These were the kind that moved with a predatory grace, slicing through the downpour like sharks through murky water. A trio of black sedans, their windows tinted to an impenetrable darkness, pulled up to the curb. They weren't police. They were something else. Men spilled out, clad in expensive leather jackets that shed the rain with contempt. They laughed, their voices loud and coarse, and their eyes landed on me like I was a piece of meat left out in the open. I recognized the swagger, the casual menace. Santo Madrigal's crew. They ran the less savory businesses along the wharf, and their reputation preceded them. "Well, well, look what the rain washed up," one of them called out, a smirk stretching across his face. "Lost little bird," another added, taking a step closer. His cologne, cheap and overpowering, reached me even through the storm. I pressed myself back against the cold brick wall of the market, my heart hammering against my ribs. I said nothing. Showing fear to men like this was like bleeding in a shark tank. I just stared straight ahead, focusing on the distorted reflection of a street lamp in a puddle, praying they would get bored and leave. They didn't. They were just getting started, their comments growing bolder, their circle tightening around me. I felt the primal panic begin to rise, the cold that had nothing to do with the rain seeping into my bones. Then, a sound cut through the noise, a soft, clean click. The third car in the procession, a sedan so black it seemed to drink the light, remained silent. But the rear passenger door had just unlatched. It swung open slowly, an invitation into a silent, dark interior. A man was sitting inside, his silhouette framed by the faint cabin light. I could only see the sharp cut of a charcoal suit, the glint of a watch. He leaned forward slightly, and a voice, low and calm as the bottom of the ocean, carried over the rain. "Get in," he said. It wasn't a question or a command, but a simple statement of fact. They won't stop. I froze, my mind already reeling, tried to process this new variable. Who was he? The car was a world away from the flashy, ostentatious vehicles Madrigal's men favored. This was understated, elegant, and infinitely more dangerous. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than the rain, that accepting a ride from this man was trading one kind of trouble for another, Debt in this city was a chain, and a favor from a man like this would be the heaviest link of all. But the men were closer now, their laughter like gravel in my ears. The choice was between the immediate, tangible threat and the unknown, veiled one. The man in the car seemed to read my hesitation. He didn't rush me. The silence from his car was a bubble of calm in the storm of their harassment. His stillness was unnerving. One of Madrigal's goons, emboldened by my inaction, lunged forward and grabbed my wrist. His grip was like a vice. "Come on, pretty thing. We'll get you warm." Before I could even wrench my arm away, a flicker of motion came from the man in the car. He didn't move a muscle, but his gaze, which I could now see was as cold and gray as steel, flicked to the man holding me, and then to a figure standing silently by the driver's side door. That was all it took. The figure, a man named Jax Orfeo, I would later learn, moved with a fluid grace that was almost feline. He wasn't large, but every motion was precise, economical. One moment the goon was holding my wrist, the next Jax had intercepted, twisted and leveraged. There was no theatrical punch, no cry of pain, just a soft whoosh of air. A dull thud as the man's back slammed into the metal signpost of the Eider Street Market, and a grunt as he slid to the wet pavement, clutching his now useless arm. It was over before the others even registered what had happened. It was brutally, terrifyingly efficient. The man in the obsidian sedan was out of the car now, a large black umbrella blooming open over his head, shielding him from the storm. He moved towards me, the rain beating on the shoulders of his immaculate charcoal vest. He wasn't tall, but he had a presence that took up all the air around him. This was Nero Vescari, head of the Vescari Syndicate, though I didn't know his name then. I just knew I was looking at power incarnate. He stopped in front of me. The remaining Madrigal men took a hesitant step back, their bravado evaporating in the face of this quiet, lethal authority. Nero's eyes met mine. They were intelligent, assessing, and held no trace of pity. He shrugged off his heavy wool overcoat and, without a word, draped it over my shoulders. It was warm from his body, and the weight was a comfort, a shield. "I don't tolerate women being forced," he said, his voice quiet, meant only for me and the men just a few feet away. The sentence was simple, unadorned, but it landed with the force of a hammer blow. It wasn't a threat, it was a declaration of principle. The Madrigal crew backed away, dragging their groaning companion with them. They piled back into their cars and sped off, disappearing into the rain-swept night. I stood there, trembling, wrapped in the coat of a stranger who commanded violence with a glance. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar wood and black coffee. Nero held the umbrella over me, his gaze unwavering. "The offer still stands," he said. This time, I didn't hesitate. I walked the few steps to the open car door and slid onto the plush leather seat. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, and the world went silent. The roar of the rain, the hiss of traffic, the entire chaotic symphony of the city was instantly muffled, reduced to a distant whisper. The car began to move, pulling smoothly away from the curb. Nero got on the other side, maintaining a respectful distance between us. He gestured to a folded, dry towel and a thermos on the seat. "Here, Ming," he said. I took the towel, my fingers clumsy with cold, and began to dry my hair and face. He poured a capful of what I realized was warm water from the thermos and handed it to me. I drank it gratefully, the warmth spreading through my frozen limbs. We sat in silence for several minutes as the car navigated the slick streets. I stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past, my reflection, a ghostly, pale face against the dark glass. I was shaking, a deep, uncontrollable tremor born of cold, fury, and a terrifying, bone-deep fear. Nero didn't speak. He just watched. His gaze wasn't predatory, but it was intense. I saw his eyes drift down to my hands, which were clenched in my lap. I followed his gaze and saw the thin, red lines crisscrossing my knuckles and fingers. angry scratches from the edge of a stainless steel tray I had dropped during the confrontation with the VIP. He noticed everything. Suddenly, a tinny voice crackled from an earpiece worn by Jax, who was now in the front passenger seat. I could only catch snippets. The girl, Davies said she was no one. Take care of it. It was one of the Madrigal crew, talking to my former manager. A connection clicked into place. Davies hadn't just fired me, he'd thrown me to the wolves. A faint, knowing smile touched Nero Viscari's lips. It was a smile as thin and sharp as a razor's edge. "Jax," Nero said, his voice still low, "take us past Gallowglass Pier. Let's make sure we're not being followed." The driver nodded, and the car took a sharp turn, heading toward the industrial wasteland of the old docks. The familiar streets gave way to dark, looming warehouses and the skeletal silhouettes of dormant cranes. The rain hammered against the roof, the only sound in the car. This was it. This was the part where the price of the ride came due. As the car slowed, cruising past a row of dark, silent piers, I tensed. My hand went to the door handle. I wasn't going to be some victim dragged to a secondary location. "I can get out here," I said, my voice coming out stronger than I expected. "Thank you for the help, but I'm fine now." Nero turned his head to look at me fully. The faint glow of the dashboard lights carved his face out of the shadows. His features were sharp, intelligent, and gave nothing away. He held my gaze for a long moment, and the car came to a complete stop beside the rusting hulk of a forgotten fishing trawler. "They locked you out in the rain," he said, his voice a quiet rumble that filled the silence. "But I opened my car door, because in here, respect isn't a privilege." His last words hung in the silent, insulated cabin of the car, a stark contrast to the violence of the rain still hammering on the roof. Respect isn't a privilege. My spine stiffened, the warmth of his coat, the sudden safety. It was all a currency. I knew how this city worked. Nothing was free, especially not from a man who had syndicate attached to his name. I pushed the damp hair back from my face, my pride a flimsy shield against the cold reality of my situation. I don't need favors from the Mafia, Mr. Viscari." I didn't know his name, but the word Mafia was the only one that fit the effortless, lethal display I had just witnessed. He didn't so much as flinch. His gaze remained level, his voice infuriatingly calm. "Call me a businessman," he replied, the sound a low rumble. "The Mafia are the men who find a woman in the rain and try to corner her. I just opened a door." He was splitting hairs, but he was also right. My hands, still clenched in my lap, began to tremble. A delayed reaction to the cold and the adrenaline. I tried to hide it, digging my nails into my palms, but he noticed. Of course he noticed. He seemed to miss nothing. He didn't reach for me. He didn't offer a comforting pat or a condescending touch. Instead, he leaned forward, and a small click sounded as the center console opened. He retrieved a small, black, leather-bound first aid kit. He placed it on the seat between us, closer to me. "Your hands," he said, nodding to the red scratches from the metal tray. "Can you manage?" I stared at the kit, then at him. The question hit me harder than the goon's grip. Can you manage? He wasn't offering to fix me. He was offering me the tools to fix myself. The respect for my boundaries was so unexpected. It almost disarmed me. I nodded, my throat tight. "Yes." My voice was a whisper, but it was steady. I opened the kit. Inside, antiseptic wipes and bandages were arranged with military precision. My fingers, still numb, fumbled with the wrapper of a wipe. I cleaned the cuts, the sting grounding me, and carefully applied 2 bandages to my knuckles. The simple act of self-care, of tending to my own wounds in his presence, felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself. When I was finished, I closed the kit and pushed it back toward him. "Keep it," he said simply. Jax, the silent, fluid man in the front seat, spoke for the first time. His voice was a low monotone, directed at the rearview mirror. "We're clear, Mr. Viscari. No tail from Gallowglass, but the copperfinch is hot tonight. Santo's eyes are everywhere." Nero Viscari nodded, and the car began to move again, gliding away from the dark pier and back toward the city's glittering, treacherous heart, the Copper Finch. I knew it, a high-end bar where the city's elite and its criminal underbelly drank side by side. We drove in silence for another minute before Nero spoke again. He didn't look at me, but stared out the windshield, as if discussing a line item on a budget. Davies, he stated, the name of my former manager dropping like a stone. Why did he throw you to them? Madrigal's men don't just show up for a fired waitress. The anger, which had been simmering beneath the fear, boiled over. Because I said no. A VIP, some city councilman's nephew, got handsy. When I pulled away, he got loud. Davies told me to apologize and make it right. And you didn't. No. So Davies fired me. But that wasn't enough for the VIP. He said I cost him face and demanded I be fined for the inconvenience. Davies called it a VIP table service fee, a fee for me refusing to be assaulted. I was shaking again, this time with pure, unadulterated rage. I hadn't even told the police. What was the point? It was my word against a man whose family probably had a wing at the library named after them. But it wasn't just that, I continued, the words tumbling out. It's how they processed it. It's a scam. The whole restaurant is... This finally made Nero turn his head, his eyes cold and assessing, fixed on me. Go on. I was studying accounting. Before I had to drop out, I see the flow. Davies uses 2 point-of-sale systems, one for the books and a ghost terminal for private events. The VIP fees, the cash drops from suppliers, tips that accidentally get zeroed out. It all goes through a shadow processor. I saw the name on the back of the ghost terminal, Harbor Line Payments. As I spoke, I watched a flicker of genuine interest in his eyes. I wasn't just a damsel in distress anymore. I was a source of information. And all of it, I finished, is funneled straight to a shell company posing as a charity, the Coastal Renewal Trust. The car was so quiet I could hear the tiny squeak of the windshield wipers. Nero stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke one name, a confirmation, not a question. Trent Hollis. I nodded, my heart hammering. Trent Hollis, the city's golden boy philanthropist, the man behind the Coastal Renewal Trust, the smiling face on every charity gala poster. Nero Vescari leaned back against the leather, a slow, dangerous smile touching his lips. It was the same smile I'd seen when he'd heard the call in Jax's earpiece. Hollis, he's getting sloppy. Dual books and a ghost processor. That's old-school greed, and suicidal if you have a forensic accountant on your waitstaff. The adrenaline was fading fast, and the deep, bone-chilling cold was setting in. The heavy wool overcoat, now damp from the rain, was starting to feel like an icy shroud. I shivered, a violent, full-body tremor. Nero noticed immediately. That coat's done its job, he said. It's getting you cold. He didn't move toward me. He simply gestured to the coat. May I? I nodded, confused. I shrugged out of the heavy, damp garment. He took it from me, his fingers brushing mine for less than a second, and folded it neatly, placing it on the floor at his feet. He then reached beside him and pulled out a soft, dark gray cashmere blanket. It looked impossibly soft. Trade, he said, holding it out. I took it. The material was light but incredibly warm. I wrapped it around my shoulders, and it was like sinking into a cloud. The scent of cedar and coffee was still there, but this time it was dry, comforting. Nero discreetly touched a control on his door, and I felt the heat in the cabin increase just a fraction of a degree. I watched him as I warmed up, his profile sharp against the passing city lights. His eyes met mine, and they stayed there. They didn't drop to my soaked blouse, which I was suddenly very aware of. They didn't scan my body. He just looked at my face, at my eyes. That simple act, that complete and total lack of a predatory gaze, was more intimate than any touch. My heart, which had been trying to escape my chest for an hour, finally began to slow. Accounting, he said quietly. That's why you saw it, and why you had to drop out. I looked down at the soft blanket. My mother. She got sick. The hospital bills, medication, and the tuition debt. I gestured vaguely. That's why I took the job at the Gilded Plate. I was desperate enough to ignore the warning signs. Now. The image of my $47.32 balance flashed in my mind. Now I'm just broke and unemployed. He nodded slowly, a deep, resonant understanding passing between us. He understood desperation. He could see that my weakness wasn't a character flaw, it was a circumstance. This changed everything. I'm taking you to the Vermilion District, he announced, his tone shifting back to business. It's secure, it's dry. You can use a clean phone, call a lawyer if you wish. I'll have Jax take you somewhere safe afterward, not your apartment. He already knew my apartment wasn't safe, just as I was about to agree to finally accept this strange, dangerous lifeline. My own cracked phone buzzed in my backpack. A jolt of pure dread shot through me. I fumbled for it, my heart seizing. The screen lit up. Unknown caller. I looked at Nero. His expression was flat. Answer it. I pressed the cracked screen, my thumb shaking. Hello? A voice, distorted and mechanical, like something from a cheap horror movie, filled the silent car. Miss Linwood, you forgot something at the restaurant. Your job. I stopped breathing. Be smart, the voice continued, cold and empty. Come back. Apologize to Mr. Davies and his guests, or you'll find that overdraft fee is the least of your problems. We know where you sleep. The line clicked dead. A cold far worse than the rain washed over me. I stared at the black screen. They weren't just firing me. They were threatening me. They were ensuring my silence. I looked up at Nero Viscari. He had heard every word. His face was carved from stone. His eyes now 2 chips of dark ice. A muscle in his jaw clenched, the only sign of his anger. They think you're alone, he said, his voice a low, lethal promise. I looked out the window. The rain was still falling. Out there was Santo Madrigal's crew, a manager who'd sold me out, a shadow organization that knew my address, and an empty bank account. In here was a man who dealt in violence, but who had offered me a bandage, a blanket, and a choice. The risk with him was a dark, uncharted ocean. The risk without him was a certainty. I would be crushed by morning. I turned back to him, meeting his intense, unwavering gaze. I wasn't a victim being rescued. I was a survivor making a strategic alliance. I gave a single, short nod, a temporary pact, a deal struck between my will to survive and his hidden agenda. The car ascended, not through streets, but up a private, enclosed ramp that spiraled into the sky. We emerged into a garage carved into the top floor of a skyscraper, a concrete antechamber to the heavens. The Vermilion District wasn't a neighborhood. It was a vertical kingdom. Jax led me from the car, through a heavy steel door, and into another world. I was standing in Nero Viscari's rooftop greenhouse. It wasn't a quaint garden. It was a cathedral of glass and black steel, a sprawling, multi-leveled space where lush, tropical plants grew in defiance of the city's concrete heart. The rain, now a distant drumming rhythm on the glass ceiling, felt miles away. Through the towering panes of glass, the lights of Rainport and its storm-tossed harbor spread out below us like a fallen constellation. In the center of the main atrium, incongruous among the ferns and orchids, was a large, wheeled whiteboard. On it was a flowchart, drawn in clean, black marker. At the top, a box read, Coastal Renewal, Trust Hollis. An arrow pointed down to Harbor Line Payments. Another arrow branched off to a series of smaller boxes labeled simply, Phantom Donations? Nero Viscari had already been mapping the beast. He hadn't rescued a victim tonight. He'd stumbled upon a missing piece of his own puzzle. He walked to the board, picking up a black marker, and he didn't lecture, and he just looked at me, his gray eyes expectant. Hollis is clean on paper. The trust is a fortress of shell corporations and legal firewalls. Harborline is his weak point, but we've never been able to prove how the dirty money gets in. The deposits are too small, too random. I took a breath, the warm, humid air of the greenhouse a balm to my chilled lungs. I walked closer, my tattered sneakers silent on the polished stone floor. This was my territory now, not the violence, not the intimidation, but the cold, hard logic of numbers. He uses the weather, I said. My voice was clear, steady. And he uses people like me. On nights with bad storms, like tonight, foot traffic is low, but the cash-on-hand totals reported by Davies are always abnormally high. It's the perfect cover. Who's going to question a busy restaurant having a good night? I took the marker from his unresisting fingers. My hand was steady as I drew a new box next to Harborline Payments. I labeled it the Gilded Plate Ghost POS. It's a dual checkout process, I explained, my old accounting instincts taking over. Every legitimate credit card transaction is run twice, once on the official system, which generates a real receipt for the customer, and a second time, a ghost transaction, on the Harborline terminal. The customer never sees it. At the end of the night, Davies reconciles the books by claiming the ghost transactions were cash payments. The inflated cash totals then match the deposits funneled to the trust, making it look like legitimate restaurant revenue. I drew an arrow from my new box to phantom donations. It was the missing link, the mechanism, the how. It was the kind of detail you could only see from the inside, from the floor, with your hands on the machines. Nero stared at the board, his expression one of deep, focused concentration. He wasn't looking at a crime. He was looking at a system, a beautifully corrupt machine, and I had just given him the operator's manual. "This is enough," he said quietly, "enough to bring it to the National Financial Integrity Directorate, an FID, a federal agency." The name sent a jolt of fear through me. They'll never believe me. It's my word against Trent Hollis's. "They won't be hearing it from you," Nero countered. "They'll receive an anonymous, encrypted data packet from a source they trust, a source I control. They get the information, the source remains clean, and Hollis's empire gets a full federal audit." It sounded too neat, too easy. My life was already in pieces, and I wasn't about to hand the shards over to him without knowing the price. "I have conditions," I said, my voice firm. I had his attention now. "First, real legal protection. Not a ghost. I want a lawyer, someone who answers to me. Second, if this works, I need a job, a legitimate one. I can't go back to waiting tables. And third, the other staff at the restaurant, the cooks, the bussers, the other waitresses. They're innocent. They have families. I won't have them lose their jobs because of this." Nero didn't hesitate. He pulled out a sleek black phone and dialed a number. "Leda, I need you at the greenhouse. Now." He paused, listening. "Bring a change of clothes, size 4. He looked at me for confirmation, and I gave a slight nod, stunned by his perception. "And Leda," he added, his voice dropping slightly, "bring a contract, consulting services." He hung up. "Done," he said. 20 minutes later, Leda Quinn arrived. She was a storm in a tailored pantsuit, her sharp brown eyes missing nothing. She handed me a garment bag with a quiet, "This should work," before turning her full attention to the whiteboard. She listened without interruption as Nero gave her the broad strokes, and I filled in the granular details of the POS system. When I was finished, she looked at me, a flicker of professional respect in her gaze. "She has eyes for numbers," Leda said to Nero, though the comment felt like it was for me. "She doesn't just see a ledger, she sees the story." Then, her focus sharpened. "This is good, but it's circumstantial. To get a warrant that will stick, NFID needs an active, ongoing crime, a real-time data capture." Nero's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and a new level of intensity entered the room. "We just got it," he said, looking from Leda to me. "Hollis is hosting a private art auction tonight at Vault 23 under the old abandoned train station." Leda's eyebrows shot up. "He's getting bolder. An auction is the fastest way to wash a large sum of money. Convert illicit cash into a tangible, high-value asset with a plausible paper trail." He'll be using mobile payment terminals, Nero continued, the pieces clicking into place, all networked, all running through Harbor Line payments. He turned to me, and I suddenly felt like the most important person in the world. He doesn't know your face, does he, Hollis? I shook my head. I've only ever seen him in pictures. You can walk between both worlds, Nero said. You're the only one who can get close enough to those terminals to identify the ghost system's interface, the only one who would recognize the software. The plan formed with a terrifying speed. Leda laid out the legal framework if I, as a private citizen, witnessed what I reasonably believed to be a crime in progress and used a passive data collector to capture evidence in a public space. That evidence would be admissible. It was a legal gray area, but one she was confident she could defend. I would be their Trojan horse. Jax, who had been a silent presence by the door, spoke up. Santo Madrigal's crew has been sniffing around Hollis's operation for weeks. Santo thinks Hollis is expanding too fast, getting too greedy. If there's a big money event happening, Madrigal will be there. He won't be there to buy art. He'll be there to send a message, or to take over. The room fell silent. The plan wasn't just legally risky, it was physically dangerous. A collision between two criminal enterprises with me, an unemployed accounting student, caught in the middle. Nero turned his full attention to me. The strategic planning was over. The cold, calculating businessman was gone. The man who had opened his car door for me was back. His eyes searched mine, looking for any hint of hesitation. Are you sure? Mara, he asked, his voice low and serious. Once we walk through that door, there's no going back. I thought of Mr. Davies's sneer. I thought of the drunk VIP's entitled hands. I thought of the distorted, threatening voice on the phone. And I thought of the rain, the cold, humiliating rain. I lifted my chin, my gaze as steady as his. They locked me out in the rain, I said, my voice quiet but filled with a conviction I didn't know I possessed. I want to see them get soaked. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He nodded once. Leda, get her ready. Leda led me to a small, private office off the main atrium. The garment bag held a simple, elegant, long-sleeved black dress, conservative enough to be forgettable, and a pair of low, practical heels. As I changed, I felt myself transforming. The scared, drenched waitress was being shed, replaced by someone else, someone with a purpose. When I emerged, Nero was waiting. He was holding a dark, tailored coat, not the one he'd given me earlier, but a lighter one, clearly from Leda's collection. He held it open for me. As I slid my arms in, he moved to smooth the collar. His fingers brushed the skin at the nape of my neck, a touch so light it was barely there, but it sent a jolt of electricity down my spine. He paused, his hand hovering over the top button near my collarbone. His eyes met mine. A silent question. May I? The air crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with Trent Hollis or Santo Madrigal. It was a different kind of danger, a different kind of thrill. I gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. His fingers, warm and steady, closed the button. The brief touch was a brand. The distance between us had shrunk to nothing, but it was a space filled with respect, not threat. He stepped back. Jax will brief you on the device. It's the size of a credit card. You just need to brush it against the back of their terminals. I had one last condition. The weapons, I said, looking from Nero to Jax. Madrigal's men will be armed, but your team? I want your word. Non-lethal force only. Tasers, stun guns, whatever. No one dies tonight because of me. Jax looked at Nero, a questioning arch to his eyebrow. This was not their usual way of doing business. Nero didn't even look at him. His eyes remained locked on mine. You have my word, he said. Minimum violence. Maximum impact. Vault 23 was not a gallery. It was a tomb. It lay deep beneath the old, abandoned rail station, a place the city had forgotten. The air was cold, smelling of damp concrete, ozone from the active tracks far above, and a faint, coppery scent of decay. We had descended in a rattling freight elevator, the kind meant for hauling cargo, not multimillionaires. The only light came from long, flickering fluorescent tubes that cast everything in a harsh, buzzing, blue-white glare. The space was vast, a cavern of raw concrete pillars and weeping walls. But along these walls, hung on industrial steel rails, was the art. Canvases wrapped in thick linen, sculptures under tarps. It was a grotesque juxtaposition. And moving between them, like ghosts at a feast, were the attendees. Rainport's elite, the old money and the new, the hyper-rich, the politicians, the bankers, they clutched champagne flutes, their diamonds and designer dresses, looking garish and out of place in the industrial gloom. And mingling with them, indistinguishable in their bespoke suits but for the predatory stillness in their eyes, were the others, the high-level criminals, the men who, like Nero, understood that art wasn't for appreciating, it was for moving. I clutched the small, card-like data skimmer in my palm. It was cold, smooth, and heavy with the weight of my future. My dress, the simple black sheath Leda had provided, felt like a costume. I was an imposter, a waitress playing spy. Nero was at my side, a ghost in a perfectly cut, muted tuxedo. He looked bored, but his eyes were constantly moving, cataloging, assessing his watch. The one with the smoky face was the only piece of jewelry he wore. He fit in this world of concrete and corruption far better than he had in the greenhouse. He was a product of the city's underbelly, its steel and shadows. "The payment system," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Waiters, mobile terminals," he murmured back, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back. It wasn't a possessive gesture, it was a tether, grounding me. I spotted one, a waiter in a crisp white jacket, holding a tray of drinks and a black mobile POS terminal. As he passed, I saw the logo on the back, illuminated for a second under a flickering light, Northlight Endeavors. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was them. It was real. "I need to get closer," I said. Nero didn't move. He simply waited. Another waiter, this one heading for a different group, began to approach. Nero took one subtle step to his left, as if to examine a painting, blocking the waiter's path. The waiter, annoyed, had to divert. His new path took him directly past me. It was now or never. As he passed, I stumbled, my arm bumping his. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I gasped, my free hand flying to my chest, my other hand, the one holding the skimmer, brushed against the back of the terminal he was holding. The contact lasted less than a second. The waiter glared. "Watch it!" "My apologies," I said, trying to sound flustered. He huffed and moved on. I pulled my hand back, hiding it in the folds of my dress. I didn't dare look, but I could feel the tiny, pinprick vibration of the device. It was active. It was listening. "Well done," Nero's voice was a low rumble by my ear. Before I could even breathe, the atmosphere in the vault shifted. The ambient murmur of conversation died. The crowd near the entrance parted like the Red Sea. Santo Madrigal had arrived. He was the opposite of Nero. Where Nero was quiet, controlled elegance, Santo was a spectacle. He wore a loud, pinstriped suit, his smile wide enough to swallow the room, but his eyes were flat, dead, like polished stones. He was flanked by 4 of his men, the same kind of thugs who had cornered me, only these were in suits. His gaze swept the room, and then it landed on me. I froze. My blood turned to ice. He hadn't seen my face clearly in the downpour. Had he? His smile widened. He recognized me. He started to walk toward us, his pace slow, deliberate. "Well, look at this." His voice, slick with false charm, cut through the silence. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes raking over me. "Cleaned up real nice. Haven't you must have found a better umbrella?" The room was silent. Every eye was on me. I felt the heat of 100 stares, the humiliation of that night washing over me again, fresh and burning. I was the girl from the gutter, the trash he'd seen soaking on the sidewalk. Before I could speak, before I could even shrink, Nero moved. It was a simple economical shift. He stepped half a pace forward, placing his body partially in front of me, breaking Santo's direct line of sight. He didn't look at Santo. He didn't acknowledge him. He simply addressed the auctioneer at the front of the room, his voice cool and clear. "Are we proceeding with the auction, or is this part of the performance?" The insult was magnificent. He had dismissed Santo Madrigal as nothing more than a street performer. Santo's shark-like smile tightened, the humor vanishing from his eyes, leaving only the cold, dead stone. He held Nero's gaze for a long, toxic moment before letting out a short, barking laugh. "Just admiring the art, Vescari," he sneered. "Just admiring the art." He turned and sauntered off toward the bar, his men following like vultures. My knees felt weak. I was breathing again. Nero's hand on my back was steady, a silent promise. The auction restarted, the air thick with an ugly, unresolved tension, a large, mediocre painting of the Rainport Harbor at night, all smeared blues and blacks, was brought out. The bidding started at an already inflated $50,000. "This is it," I whispered. The bidding was frantic, a clear pissing contest between two men I didn't recognize. It ended at $450,000. For a painting that wasn't worth $4, this was the wash. The buyer, a man in an obnoxiously bright blue suit, motioned to a waiter, but he didn't hand over one card. He handed over 3. The waiter returned with 3 separate Northlight Endeavors terminals. My inner accountant screamed, "Nero," I breathed. "Look, a split payment. He's layering the transaction at the point of sale. 3 different cards, 3 different terminals. He's breaking one large, dirty transaction into 3 smaller, slightly less dirty ones. It's brazen." "It's sloppy," Nero corrected, his eyes dark with a predator's focus. "And the skimmer is getting all of it." Just as the transactions completed, another man made his entrance. This one didn't part the crowd with fear. He glided through it with a politician's practiced ease. He was handsome, silver-haired, radiating a false, polished warmth. Trent Hollis. He was the man behind the Coastal Renewal Trust, the man who had ordered me threatened. He spotted Nero, a flicker of surprise, then calculation, crossed his face. He changed course, heading directly for us. "Nero," Hollis said, his voice as smooth as aged whiskey, "I'm surprised to see you appreciating culture." "Trent," Nero replied, his voice a flat, cold plain. "I appreciate systems, and yours is ambitious." The subtext was so thick I could barely breathe. Hollis's smile didn't waver. He extended a hand. "Always a pleasure." Nero took it. I watched Hollis's knuckles go white as he squeezed. A pathetic, obvious display of dominance. It was a schoolyard power play. Nero didn't flinch. He didn't wince. He didn't squeeze back. He simply held his ground, his gaze level, his hand matching Hollis's pressure with immovable, passive resistance. He let the silence stretch, forcing Hollis to either crush his own hand or be the first to let go. Hollis's smile strained. He was the first to break, pulling his hand back with a short, forced laugh. "Enjoy the art," he said, and glided away. The moment he was gone, a deafening, high-pitched shriek filled the vault, a fire alarm. Red lights began to flash, painting the concrete walls in blood. The crowd panicked. People screamed, shoving toward the freight elevator. But Madrigal's men didn't run for the exit. They ran for the art. 2 of them grabbed the Rainport Nocturne that had just been sold, ripping it from its display. This wasn't a random act. This was a hostile takeover. "This way." Jax was suddenly there, emerging from the shadows. He grabbed a metal fire extinguisher from the wall and slammed it into a large, gray junction box. A shower of sparks exploded, and the main fluorescent lights in our section of the vault died, plunging us into a strobe-lit chaos of red emergency beacons. "Service exit now." Nero's hand grabbed mine, not my wrist, but my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. He pulled me into the surging crowd. We were moving, fast, toward a dark corridor. I was pushed, separated from him by a wave of screaming guests. A heavy hand clamped down on my upper arm. I was spun around and slammed back against the damp concrete wall. It was one of Santo's men, not the one Jax had dealt with, but he had the same dead eyes. "Where do you think you're going? Pretty umbrella," he sneered, his face inches from mine. "The party's just starting." Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. Then I remembered, gauge the distance, use their own force. Elbow, wrist, knee, the hasty 60-second self-defense lesson Nero had given me in the car on the way here, his voice low and urgent. I didn't think. I reacted. I slammed my free elbow back into his ribs, hard. He grunted, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all I needed. I twisted my arm, not pulling away, but rotating with his hold, breaking his grip. As his arm flew wide from the unexpected movement, I drove my knee straight up into his gut. It wasn't a movie knockout. He didn't fly across the room, but he doubled over, the air rushing out of him in a pained whoosh. It bought me a second. It wasn't enough. He roared in rage and lunged, pulling a small, black, collapsible baton from his jacket. "You little—" A black shape cut through the red-lit darkness. Nero. He shoved me, hard, sending me sprawling back against the wall as he stepped between us, taking my place. The baton came down with a sickening thwack. It struck Nero's shoulder. I heard the impact, a dull, wet crack of metal on bone and muscle. Nero didn't make a sound. He didn't cry out. He absorbed the blow. His teeth gritted so hard I could see the muscles in his jaw bunch. And in the same fluid motion, before the goon could swing again. Nero's hand flashed out. He was holding a taser. A bright blue-white spark lit the corridor, a high-voltage sizzle. The goon's body went rigid, his eyes rolling back, and he collapsed in a twitching heap. The main lights flickered back on, revealing a scene of utter chaos. Hollis's private security, dressed in black tactical gear, was flooding the room, but they were focused on Madrigal's men, who were already retreating with the painting. Now, Jax's voice. He had a heavy steel service door prized open at the end of the corridor. Nero grabbed my hand again, pulling me past the fallen goon. We piled into the narrow, dark shaft of a service elevator. Jax hit the button, and the heavy steel door slid shut, plunging us into darkness and cutting off the sounds of the alarm and the shouting. We ascended in silence, the only sound the hum of the old motor. I was shaking, the adrenaline draining away, leaving a hollow, vibrating terror. Nero was leaning against the far wall, breathing heavily, his left arm held stiffly at his side. The elevator dinged and stopped. The doors opened onto a dim, concrete landing. Jack stepped out first, checked the hallway, and nodded. "All clear." We stepped out. The adrenaline was gone, and now I could see the pain etched around Nero's mouth. "You're hurt," I said. It was a statement. He tried to shrug, a motion he instantly regretted, wincing as a sharp pain shot through him. "It's fine." "Let me see." I didn't wait for permission. I stepped in front of him, into his space, and gently pushed aside the torn fabric of his tuxedo jacket. The white shirt beneath was already showing a dark, spreading stain. A perfect angry welt was rising on the crest of his shoulder. My fingers, trembling, reached out and brushed the hot, bruised skin. He had taken that from me. He hadn't hesitated. He caught my wrist. His grip wasn't violent, but it was absolute. It stopped my hand, but he didn't pull it away. He just held it there, his warm fingers wrapped around my wrist, pressing my hand against the wound he'd taken from me. The air in the small landing was thick, electric. We were standing inches apart. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, see the pulse hammering in his throat. "I'm here for you, Mara," he breathed, his voice low and raw, rough with pain. His gray eyes, no longer cold steel, were locked on mine. They were dark, intense, and filled with 1,000 things I couldn't name. The world outside the sirens, the vault, the rain, it all disappeared. There was only the concrete landing, the smell of ozone, and the scorching, silent connection that held us both captive. The ride back to the rooftop greenhouse was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than before. The tension of the unknown had been replaced by the thrumming, shared hum of adrenaline. Jax drove with unnerving calm, navigating the rain-slicked streets as if he were out for a Sunday drive, while Nero sat beside me. His left shoulder held rigid, his face a pale, stoic mask in the fleeting glow of the streetlights. The scattered rain tapped a gentle, sporadic rhythm on the glass ceiling of the greenhouse, a stark contrast to the violent downpour that had started my night. Below us, the city lights of Rainport weren't a smear anymore. They were a river of stars, clear and sharp against the wet, black night. Jax disappeared the moment we stepped out of the elevator, melting into the shadows to give us space. Nero went straight to a small, hidden bar behind a wall of broad-leafed ferns and pulled out a bottle of something dark and a single glass. He winced as he reached, the movement pulling at his injured shoulder. "Don't," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Sit down." He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his gray eyes, but he didn't argue. He walked over to a low, leather couch and sat, shrugging carefully out of his ruined tuxedo jacket. I went to a small, stainless steel kitchenette I hadn't noticed before, found the freezer, and wrapped a handful of ice cubes in a clean dish towel. When I came back, he was watching me, his expression unreadable. I knelt on the floor in front of him. "This is going to be cold," I warned. I gently pushed aside the torn collar of his shirt and pressed the makeshift ice pack to the angry, swelling bruise on his shoulder. He hissed, a sharp intake of breath, his whole body going rigid. I could feel the heat of his skin through the thin towel. His muscles were coiled springs, a lifetime of control battling a simple, primal reaction to pain. My fingers, steady now, rested on his collarbone, holding the ice in place. Under my touch, I felt the frantic, powerful beat of his pulse. He smelled of rain, wool, and something else, something uniquely him, clean and sharp like the city air after a storm. We stayed like that for a long moment, the only sounds the soft dripping of water from the leaves of an orchid and the distant sigh of the city. "You shouldn't have done that," I whispered, my eyes on the dark, spreading bruise. "You shouldn't have taken that hit for me." "He was going to hurt you," he said, his voice a low rasp. "That was not an acceptable outcome." "And this is," I countered, pressing a little harder with the ice. He flinched. "Now you're the one who's hurt." "This is a cost I chose to pay," he replied, his gaze intense. "You were not given a choice." There it was again. Choice. The central pillar of his strange, dangerous code of honor. But I knew the world he lived in. I knew that choices came with strings. "I don't want to be a debt on your ledger, Nero," I said, finally looking up, meeting his eyes. "I'm grateful, more than I can say, but I can't be an asset, another one of your acquisitions." The fear was real, a cold knot in my stomach. I was useful to him now, but what happened when I wasn't? What happened when the data was handed over and Trent Hollis was yesterday's news? He didn't pull away. He didn't laugh. He looked at me. And I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before, a deep, profound seriousness that bordered on pain. "I promised you a choice, Mara," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "That promise is not transactional. The job offer is real. Leda is already drafting the contract. The salary is more than fair. You will have your own security, your own apartment, and the funds to finish your degree. You can accept it or you can refuse it. You can walk out that door right now, and I will still have Jax take you somewhere safe, somewhere they will never find you. You don't owe me anything. What happened tonight? I did that because it was the right thing to do, not to purchase your loyalty." The sincerity in his voice was a physical force. It stripped away the last of my defenses. The space between us, already small, seemed to vanish. I could feel the warmth of his breath, hear the soft rasp of his unshaven jaw as he spoke. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a counterpoint to the steady, powerful rhythm I could feel under my hand. Slowly, deliberately, I moved my hand from his collarbone to the center of his chest. I splayed my palm flat against his sternum, over his heart. It was a solid, unwavering beat, the rhythm of a man who was an anchor in a storm. He didn't move. He barely seemed to breathe. He just watched me, his gray eyes dark and searching. I was in control, and in that moment, I knew I was safer with him than I had been with anyone in my entire life. I leaned in. My lips met his. It wasn't a kiss of frantic passion or desperate relief. It was slow, a question, a discovery. His lips were firm, warm, and they softened instantly under mine. I felt a shudder go through his entire body, a tremor of tightly leashed control finally breaking. The rain began to tap against the glass roof again. A soft, steady beat, and the kiss deepened in time with it. His good arm came up, his hand sliding around to the small of my back, holding me steady, drawing me closer. It was a gesture of support, not possession. His fingers spread wide, a warm, solid pressure that didn't dare dip lower. He was holding to his promise even now. My back was against the warm, humid glass of the greenhouse wall, the city lights a blurred river of gold behind me. Our breath mingled, tasting of the night and the rain. I felt his lips move from my mouth, tracing a soft path along my jaw. His breath a warm whisper against my skin as he spoke the two words I needed to hear more than anything. "You're safe." The words, the kiss, the heat building between us, it was too much, too fast. It was a fire catching on dry tinder, and we were both in danger of being consumed by it, with a strength that cost me everything. I pulled back slightly. He let me go instantly, his hand dropping from my back. We were breathing hard, our foreheads resting against each other, the space between us electric. A small, breathless laugh escaped my lips, and after a second, I heard him chuckle, a low, rough sound of disbelief. It was a shared moment of sanity, a mutual decision made by two adults who understood that some things were too important to rush. "Cold," I murmured, my voice shaky. "The ice is melting." He stepped back, giving me room to breathe. "Right." He disappeared for a moment and came back with a large, ridiculously soft gray wool sweater. He held it out for me, and I shrugged out of Lada's damp black dress and pulled the warm sweater over my head. It smelled of him, cedar and coffee. He then returned with 2 mugs of steaming ginger tea. We sat on the couch, not touching, but the space between us was no longer a divide. It was a shared territory. We drank our tea and watched the last of the rain wash the city clean. "Why accounting?" he asked, his voice returning to its normal, calm timbre. "It doesn't seem to fit." I smiled, a real smile this time. My mom, she used to say that numbers don't lie. People do. She was a bookkeeper. She loved the order of it, finding the story in the balance sheets. When she got sick, I had to drop out to take care of her. The debt, it just piled up. I looked at him. "And you? I assume you weren't born in a suit, running a syndicate from a glass tower." A shadow passed over his face, a memory from a different life. "I grew up on those docks," he said, nodding toward the distant, dark harbor. "My mother worked in a fish cannery. I watched men like Santo Madrigal and Trent Hollis, men with different kinds of power, treat people like her as disposable, like pieces on a board. I swore I would never be that weak, and I swore that if I ever got power, I would build my own rules, rules based on respect, not fear." His words clicked everything into place, why he'd stopped, why he'd offered me a bandage instead of an ultimatum. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was trying not to be the villain he'd grown up hating. "The day you say stop, I stop," he said quietly, looking directly at me. It was a vow. Just as I was about to reply, his phone, sitting on the table between us, lit up with a text message. It was from Leda. "An FID is moving. They want to meet the source. Neutral ground. Seaward Archive. Tomorrow at 10. The world came rushing back in. The chaos, the danger, the fight that was far from over. I looked at the phone. then at him. He was watching me, his expression serious. The source. That was me. I was the one who had to walk into that room. "We go together," he said, as if reading my mind. He stood up and held out his hand. I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine. A brief, warm, reassuring squeeze. Then he let go. The promise of a partnership hanging in the air between us. The Seaward Archive was a place built for secrets. It wasn't a public library. It was a private, hushed repository of old maps, shipping ledgers, and the quiet histories of Rainport's founding families. The air smelled of aging paper, leather, and lemon oil. We met in a conference room walled with frosted glass, a translucent cage that distorted the world outside into blurry, silent motion. I was not in the room. I was 2 floors above, in a small, soundproofed listening post with Nero, watching the meeting on a high-definition monitor. Leda was my proxy, my voice. She sat alone at a long mahogany table, a slim, encrypted hard drive placed precisely in the center. She was the picture of corporate legal counsel, calm, formidable, and utterly in control. A woman entered the conference room. She was sharp, dressed in a practical, no-nonsense suit, her eyes constantly moving, assessing. This was Special Agent Lark Aiden of the NFID. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You have something for me, Miss Quinn," Aiden said, her voice crisp and clear through our earpieces. "My client has authorized me to provide you with raw, unanalyzed data pertaining to certain financial irregularities," Leda replied, her tone coolly professional. She slid the drive across the table. We watched in silence as Aiden produced a heavily encrypted government-issue laptop, plugged in the drive, and began to work. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Graphs and strings of numbers filled her screen. For 10 minutes, the only sound was the soft clicking of keys. Then, Aiden leaned back, her expression grim. "The financial fingerprint is undeniable. This data stream originates from multiple ghost terminals and points directly to Trent Hollis's Coastal Renewal Trust. It's the key we've been missing." She paused, her gaze sharp as a scalpel. "But it's not enough. To get a federal racketeering charge to stick, I need to connect Hollis to a known criminal organization. I need a link to Santo Madrigal's outfit. This data shows the wash, but it doesn't show who brought in the dirty laundry." Nero, standing beside me, didn't react, but I felt a subtle shift in the tension of the room. This was the complication. "My client is a civilian," Leda said, her voice firm. "They have taken an incredible risk to provide this. Their safety is the paramount concern." "Of course," Aiden agreed. "We can place your source in the Civil Witness Protection Program. New identity, new life. They'll disappear." My stomach clenched. Disappear, erased. I looked at the city through the soundproof window. The familiar skyline of Rainport, my home. I hadn't gone through all this just to be vaporized. "My client has no intention of disappearing," Leda said, as if reading my mind. "They require temporary, localized protection, a provisional identity for legal proceedings, and guaranteed immunity from prosecution, after which they intend to resume their life." Aiden considered this. It was an unusual request. "And what about the man who was with your source at the auction, the one who engaged Madrigal's enforcer?" My breath caught. "A security consultant hired by my client for the evening," Leda said smoothly, without missing a beat. "His involvement ends here. He's not part of this agreement." Nero's role had to be firewalled. If the NFID started digging into the Vescari syndicate, this entire fragile alliance would collapse. After a long, tense moment, Aiden nodded. "Agreed, for now. But if Hollis walks because we can't tie him to the mob, this was all for nothing." The meeting ended. The first move on the board had been made, but the game was far from over. The next morning, Trent Hollis made his countermove. He didn't use goons or threats. He used a television camera. I watched, my heart pounding, as he stood on the steps of City Hall, looking handsome and besieged, a phalanx of microphones in his face. He announced a $5 million donation from the Coastal Renewal Trust to a new Clean Harbor initiative. And it is with a heavy heart, he said, his voice thick with false sincerity, that I must also announce that we have been the target of a malicious campaign of misinformation, likely orchestrated by dark, criminal elements who resent our efforts to build a better rainport for everyone. I squeezed the cheap paper coffee cup in my hand, the hot liquid sloshing over my fingers. He was painting himself as the victim, the philanthropist under attack, and I was the dark, criminal element. Before my anger could even solidify, Nero made his move. It wasn't public. It was silent, brutal, and executed with the precision of a surgeon. A press release, issued from an obscure financial group I'd never heard of called the Argent Guild, announced the controlling stake acquisition of the parent company that owned the Gilded Plate and a dozen other mid-level restaurants in the city. By noon, Mr. Davies, my former manager, had been fired, escorted from the premises by private security. By 3 o'clock, Leda Quinn had filed a multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit on my behalf against the restaurant's former ownership for wrongful termination and creating a hostile work environment. It was a brilliant, strategic strike. It severed Hollis's control over that specific restaurant, cutting off one of his primary money laundering pipelines, and it did so under the legally justifiable umbrella of a workplace dispute. It wasn't a criminal complaint. It was a business transaction and a civil suit. Clean, unimpeachable. We were back in the greenhouse, the whiteboard now covered in a complex web of corporate shells and legal statutes. The air hummed with a new, faster rhythm. "It's a good shot," Leda said, tapping the board, "but it's a flesh wound. Hollis will just open a new pipe somewhere else. We still need to connect him to Madrigal." As if on cue, Jax entered the room. "Santo's making a play," he said, his voice flat. "He's putting the word out that he's taking over all port security contracts, effective this week. My sources say he's planning a major shipment, something to prove to the other players that he's the only game in town at the docks." Nero stared out at the harbor, his jaw tight. "He's getting squeezed. Our move on the restaurant spooked his cash flow. He needs a big score to reassert his dominance." He looked at Jax. "We stick to the principle. We find the shipment. We arrange for the NFID to be there. But we do it clean. No firefight. We can cut the power to the loading cranes, create a signal disruption that forces a manual inspection." Jax suggested, "They'll be caught red-handed." I had been staring at the printouts of the data from the skimmer, the strings of numbers that had started all this. Something had been bothering me, a tiny, repeating pattern I couldn't place. And then I saw it. "Wait," I said, my voice cutting through their tactical planning. They both looked at me. I pointed to a line item on the printout. "Here, on every single transaction processed through the Northlight Endeavor's terminals, there's a recurring microcharge, 0.25%. It's labeled Port Authority Tariff." Leda leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. "There's no such thing. The Port Authority levies fees on shipping containers, not on individual credit card transactions at a black market art auction." "Exactly," I said, my mind racing. "It's a ghost tax, a digital skimming operation. It's so small, no one would ever notice it on a single transaction. But across thousands of transactions, washing millions of dollars, it adds up. It's a separate automated revenue stream, built right into Hollis's software." A slow smile spread across Leda's face, and I'd be willing to bet my license that the account this tariff is paid into is owned by a shell corporation controlled by one Santo Madrigal. This was it, the missing link, the digital handshake between the white-collar philanthropist and the dockside mob boss. The pace, already fast, accelerated to a blur. Leda prepared a new, encrypted packet for Agent Aiden. Jax doubled his efforts to pinpoint the time and location of Madrigal's shipment, and then the game changed again. An email landed in my new, secure inbox. It was from an old coworker at the Gilded Plate, a sweet girl named Chloe. "Mara, I know we weren't supposed to talk, but this is important. A man came by the restaurant. said he was a representative for Mr. Hollis. He said what happened to you was a terrible misunderstanding. He's offering you a full scholarship to finish your degree, your student debt paid off, and a new job as a junior auditor at the Coastal Renewal Trust. He said, Mr. Hollis wants to meet you personally, to apologize. He gave me this number. Please, be careful. I read the email twice. It was a trap, a blatant, clumsy, desperate trap. They were trying to buy me, to pull me away from whoever was protecting me, to get me alone. I showed the email to Nero. He read it, his expression hardening into granite. He didn't tell me what to do. He didn't forbid me from going. He just looked at me, his gray eyes searching mine. It's your decision, he said, his voice a low rumble. We have the tariff data. We can win this without it, but if you meet him and he admits to the connection, it's the final nail. I looked at the email, then at him. My whole life, I had been running from debt, from fear, from men like Hollis. I was done running. I wanted to face him. I wanted to be the one to close the trap. I'll meet him, I said, my voice steady, but on my terms. The preparation was swift and silent. Leda outlined 3 non-negotiable conditions for the meeting, a public place of my choosing, no physical contact, and the right to leave at any time. Jax fitted me with a listening device, a tiny microphone disguised as the top button of my blouse. The cool metal against my skin was a chilling reminder of the stakes. He walked me through 3 separate exfiltration routes from the cafe I had chosen. Finally, Nero stood before me, just before I was to leave. He looked down at the button microphone, his expression unreadable. If you feel the slightest bit of danger, he said, his voice low and intense, if his tone changes, if another car pulls up, if anything feels wrong, you say one thing, just work it into the conversation. He looked up, his eyes locking with mine. You say, have you ever heard the rain on a tin roof? The cinder stove was my choice. It was a narrow, bustling cafe tucked beside one of Rainport's old, sluggish canals. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a clear view of the street and a constant flow of customers that made it the perfect place to be both visible and anonymous. Nero was 2 blocks away in a nondescript sedan, a ghost in my ear, while Jax was positioned in a bakery across the street. A silent overwatch. I was on my own, but I was not alone. I was nursing a cup of black coffee when Trent Hollis arrived. He was exactly as he appeared on television, handsome, impeccably dressed, and radiating an aura of sanctimonious charity. He was flanked by a man with the weary, intelligent eyes of a lawyer. Hollis's smile was a masterpiece of cosmetic dentistry and public relations. Miss Linwood, he said, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone as he slid into the booth opposite me. Thank you for agreeing to meet. This is my counsel, Mr. Ames. Please, allow me to say how deeply sorry I am for the misunderstanding at the Gilded Plate. I said nothing. I just looked at him, my expression neutral, my hands wrapped around the warm ceramic mug. People like Mr. Davies, they can be overzealous, Hollis continued, oozing fake empathy. In light of your ordeal, the Coastal Renewal Trust would like to make things right. We are prepared to offer you a settlement for your emotional distress, a generous one. Furthermore, we will pay off your student debt in its entirety and, as you've heard, offer you a position in our auditing department. We value bright, observant young women like yourself. It was a golden cage, presented on a silver platter. He was offering me everything I had ever wanted. All he wanted in return, I knew, was my soul. And in return, I asked, my voice flat. Mr. Ames, the lawyer, slid a thick document across the table. A standard non-disclosure agreement. You agree not to discuss the events of that night or your employment at the restaurant. And this all goes away. You get a fresh start. Hollis leaned forward, his smile becoming slightly more predatory. It's the smart play. Mara, a girl like you, a waitress with a grievance, versus me. No one will believe you. This way, everyone wins. There it was, the subtle threat, wrapped in a veneer of concern. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the bitter liquid fortify me. I had to time this perfectly. I'm an accounting student, I began, letting a hint of deliberate naivety creep into my voice, and I was always confused by some of the restaurant's billing practices. For instance, the Port Authority tariff that was applied to certain transactions. I could never find it in any of the municipal fee schedules. I was just curious how that was calculated. I watched his face. For a split second, the philanthropic mask slipped. His eyes, for the first time, lost their warmth and became cold, hard chips of stone, and he didn't answer. He didn't have to. His gaze flickered involuntarily to his lawyer. Mr. Ames. A micro-expression of shared guilt that lasted less than a heartbeat, but the button on my blouse saw it, and Nero heard the silence. It was all the confirmation I needed. Hollis recovered quickly, forcing a condescending chuckle. "My dear, you should leave the accounting to the accountants. It's all very complex." He was trying to dismiss me, to put me back in my place, but he was rattled. I had shown him I knew something I shouldn't. His arrogance, pricked by my question, began to swell. "You have powerful friends, it seems," he said, his tone shifting, a new layer of menace creeping in. "But so do I, and my friends are the ones who write the rules. The Metropolitan Organized Crime Board has a vested interest in the smooth operation of this city's businesses. They don't appreciate disruptions." MOCB, the fictional agency he'd invented to intimidate and impress. He was boasting, trying to scare me with a boogeyman, and in doing so, he was confessing to a conspiracy. Every word was a golden thread for Leda to weave into a noose. He leaned forward again, his confidence returning, mistaking my silence for fear. He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine, on my wrist. His grip was firm, paternalistic, and utterly violating. It was a gesture of ownership. The second condition of the meeting, no physical contact, had just been broken. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my voice was calm, almost conversational. I looked past him, out the large window at the gray, overcast sky. "It looks like it might rain again," I said, my gaze distant. "Have you ever heard the rain on a tin roof?" It was the signal. I felt the faint vibration of my phone in my pocket, a confirmation text from Jax. Plan B initiated. Hollis looked at me, confused by the non sequitur. Before he could respond, a series of calm, authoritative chimes echoed through the cafe, followed by a recorded announcement. "Attention patrons. Due to a reported gas line irregularity in the building, we ask that you please evacuate in a calm and orderly fashion. We apologize for the inconvenience." There was no panic, just a collective groan of annoyance as people began to gather their things. Hollis looked irritated, the perfect opportunity to secure his NDA now ruined. He stood up, his hand finally releasing my wrist. As he turned to leave, I accidentally knocked a small plastic card from the table onto the floor. It was a simple, brightly colored card for the Cinder Stove's loyalty program. Buy 9 coffees, get the 10th free. Hollis, ever the gentleman, bent down and picked it up. "You dropped this." "Oh," I said, affecting a slight fluster. "Thank you. You can keep it, if you like. I have another one in my wallet. The coffee here is quite good." He looked at the cheap, insignificant card in his hand. For a man like him, it was beneath notice. Taking it was easier than arguing, a final, dismissive gesture to the little waitress. "Why not?" he said with a tight, insincere smile. He slipped it into his wallet. He had just voluntarily accepted a legally sanitized tracking device, a gift, offered and accepted. Leda's genius was in turning his own arrogance against him. As he and Ames walked out the door, I heard him mutter to his lawyer, his voice a low, angry growl meant only for Ames, but the microphone on my blouse was a silent witness. "This is a complication. We need to move the harbor night shipment up. Close the books for the quarter before this gets any worse." He was gone. I sat there for a moment, my body trembling with the aftershock of adrenaline. Then I stood, left a $10 bill on the table, and walked out into the cool, damp air. A light drizzle had begun to fall, misting the air and slicking the pavement. Nero's sedan pulled up to the corner just as I reached it. The back door swung open. I slid inside, and the door closed, shutting out the world once more. He was watching me, his face etched with a tension that was only now beginning to fade. "You were brilliant," he said, his voice rough with emotion. I couldn't speak. I just started to shake, a violent, uncontrollable tremor as the full weight of what I had just done crashed down on me. I had faced the monster, and I hadn't flinched. He didn't say anything else. He just closed the distance between us, sliding across the leather seat, and pulled me into a brief, hard hug. He wrapped his arms around me, holding me tight, his strength a solid, grounding force against my trembling. The warmth of his body seeped through my clothes, chasing away the chill. When he pulled back, he didn't let go completely. His hand came up to cup my face, his thumb gently stroking my cheek. His eyes, dark and intense, searched mine. And then he kissed me. It was nothing like our first kiss. There was no hesitation, no discovery. This was a confirmation. It was shorter, deeper, a kiss born of shared victory and the stark, terrifying reality of the danger we were in. It was a promise, a seal on our unspoken alliance. When he broke the kiss, we were both breathless. A faint, triumphant light had returned to his eyes. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Leda. "We have it all. The tariff slip, the MOCB confession, the Harbor Night confirmation. It's enough. I can get a joint task force warrant from NFID and the UCDW. We're going to catch them in the act." I looked up at Nero. The game of cat and mouse was over. The hunt was about to begin. The rain came back. It was always about the rain. It hammered down on Gallowglass Pier, a relentless, percussive drumming that seemed to want to wash the city's sins into the sea. The pier was a graveyard of rusting equipment, but tonight it was alive, lit by the harsh, buzzing sodium vapor lamps that cast everything in a sickly, jaundiced orange. The containers were stacked high, mountains of corrugated steel stenciled with the white, innocent logo of a red cross and the words, "Critical Medical Equipment." A perfect lie. I was not in the rain. I was in the nerve center. Nero had respected my demand to be present, but he had dictated the terms. My command post was a black windowless surveillance van, parked deep in the shadow of a monolithic gantry crane. The inside was a cocoon of glowing blue screens, the air humming with the sound of servers and cooling fans. This was my battlefield. My weapon was a keyboard. Through my earpiece, I was the silent witness to Nero's deployment. He was on the ground, a ghost in the orange-lit gloom, his voice a calm, low anchor in my ear. "Jax, Zone B, the junction box for the main crane lights. On my signal. Leda. You and Agent Aiden are the legal perimeter. No one, and I mean no one, breaches the pier until that transaction is live." "Understood," Leda's voice came back, crisp and professional. "Mara," Nero's voice softened, meant only for me. "You are the trigger. We don't move until you say, 'You see that Northlight app go active.' You give the word. Until then, you are a ghost. Understood?" "Understood," I whispered back, my eyes glued to the monitor that held a mirror image of the Northlight Endeavor's merchant portal. We didn't wait long. The first variable arrived. A trio of flashy, obnoxious sedans rolled onto the pier. Santo Madrigal. He was here to poach the shipment. Just as Jax had predicted, thinking Hollis was distracted by his new legal troubles. "Nero, we have company," I murmured. "Madrigal's crew, West Perimeter, they're fanning out, they look armed." "We see them," Nero's voice was tight. "They're early, but we stick to the plan. Non-lethal, Jax, your team engages. Now, minimum violence, maximum impact." The night exploded, but not with gunfire. I watched on the infrared camera as Jax's team, clad in dark tactical gear, moved like shadows. There were shouts, the sudden high-voltage zit of tasers, and the deafening pop hiss of flash-bang grenades that bloomed white on the monitor. It was sudden, brutal, and disciplined. Madrigal's advance team crumpled, neutralized without a single fatal shot fired. My condition, Nero's promise, held fast. Then he arrived. A single, gleaming silver sedan, gliding through the chaos as if it were immune. Trent Hollis stepped out, unfurling a matching silver umbrella. He was late. He looked pristine, untouched by the grit and rain, a man walking through a world he believed he owned. He walked calmly to the lead container, where one of his men was waiting with a laptop. My heart was in my throat. I stared at my screen, at the dormant portal. Come on, Hollis. Show me. And then it lit up. The screen flashed, a new entry appearing. Transaction initiated. Amount $4,500,000. Pending authorization. And right there, nested in the code, was the line item P. A. Tariff 0.25%. The digital handshake. The evidence. We're live, I yelled into the mic. The transaction is active later. Aiden. Now. The night erupted. Red and blue lights flashed to life, cutting through the orange gloom as NFID vehicles swarmed the entrance to the pier. I heard Agent Aiden's voice on a loudspeaker, magnified and booming. NFID, this is a federal warrant. Everyone, hands in the air now. Hollis froze. His umbrella clattered to the wet pavement. His men, caught between Madrigal's downed crew and the approaching federal agents, threw their hands up. It seemed too perfect. It was a white Port Authority truck, its own lights flashing, sped onto the pier, cutting off Agent Aiden's primary vehicle. Two men in official UCDW uniforms stepped out, projecting an aura of belligerent authority. Agent Aiden, one of them barked, marching forward. What is the meaning of this? This is a UCDW secure zone. We were not notified of this operation. You are compromising a federal investigation. My blood ran cold. It was them. The fake MOCB, Hollis's men embedded in the Port Authority. They were stalling, trying to muddy the jurisdictional waters, to create an opening for Hollis to escape. One of the guards began walking toward Hollis's cuffed men, his hand dropping to his belt. Nero, I breathed. It's a trap. It's his internal security. Before Aiden could even respond to the challenge, Nero moved. He stepped out of the shadow of a container, walking calmly into the very center of the confrontation. He was completely exposed, the rain plastering his white shirt to his shoulders, making him a beacon in the chaos. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up, undid his black tie, and pulled it free from his collar, tucking it into his pocket. It was an act of profound, terrifying confidence. Your authority is null and void. Nero's voice cut through the air. It wasn't loud, but it carried over the rain, a deep, resonant command that silenced the shouting. The urban canals and docks workforce, by federal mandate issued 60 seconds ago, has just placed this entire pier on emergency lockdown. Your jurisdiction has been temporarily suspended. As if summoned, Leda Quinn stepped out from behind Agent Aiden, holding up her phone. The screen displayed the digitally signed, time-stamped emergency warrant. Agent Aiden, Leda announced, her voice ringing with legal triumph. The UCDW lockdown is active, and the federal warrant has primacy. This is now a multi-agency federal operation. Agent Aiden didn't miss a beat. You heard her. This is a federal crime scene. Any man not wearing an NFID jacket who moves will be charged with obstruction of justice. Secure Hollis. It was the tipping point. Santo Madrigal, who had been hiding in the chaos, saw his chance for escape evaporate. From the darkness by the water's edge, he made his choice, a shout, and then the sharp, deafening crack of a real gunshot. The sound was a physical blow. I acted on pure, stupid instinct. My hand flew to the van's side door, and I shoved it open, spilling out onto the wet pavement. I had to see. Nero? I was a target. A perfect, illuminated target. Another shot cracked, this one whining off the metal frame of the van door, inches from my head. "Mara, get back!" Nero's voice was a roar of pure terror. He was moving before I had time to process the danger. He crossed the 10 yards between us in 3 bounds, a black shape moving through the rain. He didn't just push me. He slammed into me like a linebacker, his arms wrapping around me, his body acting as a human shield. He spun us, using his momentum to throw us both back into the cover of the van's open door. The world went white. A flashbang, deployed by Jax, exploded near Madrigal's position. The gunfire stopped. My ears were ringing. Nero was half on top of me, his weight pinning me against the van's floor, his hand on the back of my head, holding me down. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his voice raw, his eyes frantic. "No," I gasped. "No, the data." "Nero, the data. He'll cancel it." The realization hit me harder than the fear. I shoved at his chest, scrambling from beneath him and crawling back into the operator's chair. My hands flew over the keyboard. The Northlight transaction was still there. A mocking pending authorization. My finger found the icon Leda had shown me. A deep system loophole in the merchant services agreement. A fraud prevention kill switch. I slammed my fist onto the key. The screen flashed, the portal turning a deep, satisfying red. Transaction frozen. Merchant account locked pending federal audit. "Got him!" I breathed, my voice shaking. "It's locked! It's frozen! He can't erase it! It's ours!" Hollis saw it all. He saw his men being cuffed by the real feds. He saw Madrigal's crew vanishing into the darkness. He saw Nero, distracted, helping me up. His civilized mask shattered, revealing the desperate animal beneath. He made a run for it. He shoved Agent Aiden aside and sprinted, not for the water, but for our van, perhaps seeing it as a way out. He saw me in the open doorway. His face, once so polished, was a mask of primal rage. He lunged, his hand outstretched to shove me aside, to climb over me. He never touched me. Nero was there, a silent wall. He didn't punch him. He didn't strike him. It was a move of pure, cold economic leverage. Nero sidestepped Hollis's charge, caught the man's outstretched arm, and used his own desperate momentum against him. A twist, a pivot, and Hollis was spun around, his arm forced up his back in a brutal, non-violent shoulder lock. Hollis screamed. It was a thin, reedy sound of pain and utter defeat. The pier was now flooded with real sirens. NFID tactical teams, heavily armed and armored, swarmed the area, securing Hollis, cuffing him, reading him his rights. The 2 fake UCDW guards were flat on the pavement, their hands cuffed behind them. It was over. I looked toward the dark water, my heart sinking. Madrigal. He got away. "No, he didn't," Nero said, his voice tight. He pointed to my secondary monitor. A new window was open. A GPS map of the city, a single red dot, the loyalty card I'd given Hollis, which he must have passed to Madrigal, was moving fast up the interstate. Leda's tracking him, and Jack's got the plates from every car. He's not free, he's just running. The adrenaline, the terror, the triumph, it all drained out of me at once, leaving a cold, heavy, vibrating void. My knees gave out. I started to shake. Nero was there. His arm circled my waist, pulling me from the van, holding me up. He didn't lead me toward the flashing lights, toward Aiden or Leda. He pulled me away from the chaos into the small, dark, quiet space under the massive awning of a shipping container. The rain hammered on the metal roof just a few feet above our heads, a deafening, private roar that shut out the rest of the world. I didn't know what else to do. I buried my face in his chest, my hands gripping the front of his soaked shirt, my body shaking so violently my teeth chattered. He held me. His arms were a steel cage around me, his body a fortress against the storm. He rested his chin on the top of my head, and I felt him take a deep, shuddering breath. "It's over," he whispered, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "You're safe. It's done." We stood there for a long time, the only two people in the world, just breathing. The sirens, the shouting, the rain, it all faded into a distant noise. All I could hear was his heartbeat, steady and strong, a lighthouse in the storm. After a moment, my shaking subsided. I leaned back, just enough to look up at him. The air was so cold that our breath fogged, mingling in the small space between us, and he looked exhausted. A dark, angry bruise was forming on his jaw where I hadn't seen him get hit. But his eyes were clear, focused only on me, and filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the cold. My trembling hand found his fingers cold and wet, instantly laced through mine, a tight, grounding grip. My heart, which had been trying to beat its way out of my chest, finally began to slow, matching the steady rhythm of his. We just stood there, linked, surrounded by the wreckage of Trent Hollis's empire, listening to the rain. The morning after felt like waking from a fever dream. The world had tilted on its axis overnight. Trent Hollis's face was plastered across every news channel, but the headline wasn't Philanthropist of the Year. It was Mogul Indicted. I sat in the greenhouse, a cup of real coffee in my hands, and watched as reporters detailed a sprawling criminal enterprise of money laundering and bribery. They spoke of a shadowy network of corrupt officials Hollis had dubbed the MOCB, a phantom organization he had used to intimidate and control. The myth he had built around himself had crumbled to dust overnight. Later in the day, an online news portal ran a follow-up story on the Argent Guild's acquisition of the restaurant chain. There was a photo of the gilded plate, and taped inside the glass door where I had been thrown out was a newly framed document. The headline on it was bold and clear: New Zero Tolerance Anti-Harassment Policy. Leda Quinn's name was at the bottom as the legal architect. It was a small thing in the grand scheme of things, but to me, it felt like a tectonic shift. A rule had been rewritten. A door had been closed on the past. But my own future was an unwritten page. Agent Aiden met with Leda and me in the same sterile, frosted glass room at the Seaward Archive. Santo Madrigal is in the wind, Aiden said, getting straight to the point. He's the last loose thread until he is apprehended. You are in danger. Miss Linwood, the Bureau is formally offering you placement in the Civil Witness Protection Program. You've earned a fresh start, somewhere far from Rainport. A new name, a new city, a life scrubbed clean of debt and danger. A few days ago, I would have wept with gratitude for such an offer. But now, the thought of it left me cold. To disappear felt like letting them win. It felt like an erasure of the woman I was becoming. I looked at the blurry shape of the city through the frosted glass, the city that had nearly broken me, and realized with a startling clarity that I wasn't ready to leave. I loved its grit, its gray skies, its defiant lights shining through the rain. I appreciate the offer, Agent Aiden, I said, my voice steady, but I'm not running. Nero offered me the alternative that evening. We were back on the rooftop, the sky a deep, bruised purple of twilight. He didn't make a grand speech. He simply slid a leather-bound portfolio across the polished concrete floor between us. The Argent Guild is now the legal owner of 12 restaurants, he said, his voice quiet. Their books are a mess, a creative disaster of off-the-books payments, supplier kickbacks, and wage theft. They need a forensic accountant, an internal controls consultant to tear down the old systems and build new ones, honest ones. He tapped the portfolio. It's a 2-year contract. The salary is enough to cover your tuition at Rainport University, with enough left over to live comfortably. No strings. It's a job, Mara, a real one. I opened the portfolio. Inside was a meticulously drafted contract from Leda, but behind it were spreadsheets, business plans, and projected budgets. My heart sank even as it soared. The offer was a lifeline, a dream, but it was a dream anchored in his world. I can't be a bookkeeper for the mob. Nero, I whispered, the words tasting like ash. I can't spend my life cleaning your money. The words hit him harder than the baton. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a deep, familiar pain. He didn't get angry. He got quiet. He stood up, walked to a large drafting table, and unrolled a set of architectural blueprints. "This is not about cleaning money," he said, his voice low and intense. "This is about building something that's clean from the ground up." He pointed to the documents next to the blueprints. "This is a new wage structure, a real one, with benefits and overtime pay. This is a culinary scholarship program for kids from the docks, funded by 5% of the restaurant's net profits. This is a new supply chain sourced from local vendors, not Madrigal's protection rackets." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the man behind the syndicate leader. I saw the boy from the docks, dreaming of a different kind of kingdom. "My entire life has been about gaining power, so I wouldn't be like the men who hurt my family," he confessed, his voice raw with a vulnerability that stunned me. "My greatest fear, Mara, is that somewhere along the way, I'll wake up and realize I've become one of them." I stood up and walked to him, closing the space between us. I looked at the plans, at the desperate, brilliant hope they represented. Then I looked at him. I raised my hand and placed it gently on his cheek. His skin was rough with the day's stubble. He closed his eyes, leaning into my touch as if he were starving. "You were different from the moment you opened that car door," I said softly. "Men like them close doors. They lock them. You opened one." His eyes opened, and the gray was no longer steel. It was the color of the sea before a storm, deep and churning with emotion. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. We stood like that for a long moment, just breathing, the city lights beginning to glitter to life below us. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his gaze dropping to my lips. A silent question. The world narrowed to the inches between us, the scent of the night air, the warmth of his hand as it came up to rest on my waist. Under the soft, warm yellow light of the greenhouse, he kissed me. It was a continuation of everything that had come before, a deep, searching kiss that spoke of shared battles and silent understanding. The heat was instantaneous, a low flame that licked through my veins. My hand slid from his chest up to his back, feeling the hard, coiled muscles tense under my touch. This was the control I had felt in him from the beginning, the immense strength he held in check. His lips traced a path along my jaw, his breath warm and unsteady against my skin. He stopped, his mouth hovering just inches from mine, his voice a ragged whisper. "May I?" The question was a surrender, a handing over of the last piece of his formidable control. It was the ultimate gesture of respect. "Yes," I breathed. The kiss that followed was a deluge, a breaking storm. He deepened it, a groan rumbling in his chest as my arms wrapped around his neck, pulling him closer. It was a kiss of profound, soul-deep relief. He broke away, both of us breathless, our chests rising and falling in unison. With an ease that belied his injured shoulder, he hooked an arm under my legs and lifted me, setting me down on the edge of the heavy oak drafting table. The cool wood was a shock against my skin. He stood between my knees, his hands resting on my waist, his body a hair's breadth from mine. He leaned in again, his mouth claiming mine in a long, slow, devastating kiss that left no part of me untouched. It was a promise of a future, a claiming of the present. My hands tangled in his dark hair, and for a moment, the world and all its dangers ceased to exist. There was only this, only him. His hand slid from my waist, tracing a slow, burning path up my side, but as his fingers brushed the line where respect might become something else, he stopped. He pulled back, his breathing harsh, his eyes dark with a desire he was actively, visibly, fighting to control. A shaky, breathless laugh escaped him, and I found myself laughing with him, a shared, giddy acknowledgement of the fire we were both trying to bank. We were building something to last, and it couldn't be built on a foundation of pure combustion. "Slow and steady," he murmured, his voice thick. Slow and steady, I agreed. Later, we found ourselves in his kitchen, a sleek, minimalist space of steel and dark wood. He was surprisingly skilled, moving with an economy of motion as he chopped garlic and herbs. I made a salad. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We put on an old jazz record, a low, moody saxophone filling the comfortable silence, and after we ate, he took my hand and led me to the center of the room. He pulled me close, and we danced. A slow, simple shuffle, my head resting on his chest, his arms wrapped securely around me. My hand was over his heart, and his was laced through mine. It was an intimacy more profound than any kiss, a quiet, domestic peace I had never known. It was shattered by the shrill ring of Leda's dedicated line. Nero pulled away, his expression instantly shifting from gentle peace to sharp, cold focus. He answered. His voice clipped. "Leda." He listened, his body going still. I watched the warmth drain from his face, replaced by a glacial fury that was terrifying to behold. "Where?" he asked, his voice lethally quiet. He listened for another moment. "Double the detail. I want eyes on her at all times. No, she doesn't run." He hung up. He looked at me, and his eyes were the eyes of the man I had first met in the rain, a man who commanded violence with a glance. "That was Leda," he said, his voice flat. "Santo Madrigal was spotted at a safe house downtown. He wasn't caught, but one of his men was—" "The man is talking. Santo knows he's cornered. He's sworn he's going to restore his honor by taking out the person who stole the spotlight." He didn't need to say the name. "He's coming for you. Mara." The old, familiar fear, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up my throat. I could feel the phantom sensation of the rain, the humiliation, the helplessness. But I was not that woman anymore. "I won't run," I said, my voice clear and strong, cutting through his silent fury. "I'm not hiding. I faced Hollis. I'll face him." He stared at me, a war raging in his eyes between his instinct to lock me in a tower and his respect for the woman I had become. "The UCDW is holding a public oversight hearing on port security in 2 days," I continued, the plan forming even as I spoke. "It's because of our evidence. I'm the key witness. I will be there. I will testify. In public. In the light." He closed his eyes for a moment, the muscle in his jaw clenching. When he opened them, the battle was over. He had made his choice. "All right," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You will testify. You will have a full federal protection detail, and I will be in the back row, a shadow. I will not intervene. I will not interfere." He took a step closer, his gaze burning into mine. "But if he makes a move, if his people so much as breathe in your direction, the hearing will be the last thing he ever sees." Rainport City Hall was a theater of marble and hushed, anxious whispers. Every seat was filled, the press, smelling blood in the water, were a restless pack of wolves lining the aisles, their cameras like hungry eyes. I stood at a heavy oak podium, a single microphone in front of me, a glass of water to my right. I was wearing a simple, well-tailored gray suit that Leda had insisted upon. It was armor. I looked out at the sea of faces, and in the very back row, a quiet, immovable shadow in a dark suit. I saw him, Nero. His face was a mask of calm, but I could feel the force of his attention, a silent, invisible tether across the cavernous room. I began to speak. My voice, amplified by the microphone, was clear and steady. There was no tremor, no fear. I was not the girl from the rain anymore. I was a forensic accountant and delivering her findings. I walked the city council and the UCDW oversight committee through the entire scheme. I explained the dual point-of-sale systems, the ghost transactions that appeared only on stormy nights, the genius and the arrogance of the Port Authority tariff. On a massive screen behind me, grainy, time-stamped security footage from Vault 23 played on a loop, the frantic, split payment transaction for the ridiculously overpriced painting, a silent, digital confession. I knew he was out there, Santo Madrigal, somewhere in the crowd, My federal detail was a subtle but constant presence, their eyes scanning, searching in my ear. A tiny, flesh-colored receiver connected me to Jack's. His voice was a low, calm whisper. Spotted, third row from the back, press section, baseball cap and glasses. He has a man moving towards the West Logistics Corridor. We see him. Stand by. Nero's discipline was absolute. I saw him give a nearly imperceptible shake of his head on the monitor feed from a camera trained on the back of the room. He wanted Santo to make his move here, in the light, on the record. And he did. My phone, which I had placed face down on the podium as a timer, began to vibrate, a blocked number. My heart leaped into my throat. It was him. I took a breath. I looked at the council chairman. Gentlemen, if you'll permit me one final piece of evidence. Before they could answer, I picked up the phone and answered the call. I pressed the speaker button. The entire room, a chamber built for laws and order, fell silent. Santo Madrigal's voice, a slick, venomous whisper, filled the air. You talk too much. Little bird, you should have stayed in the gutter. After this little show is over, I'm going to find you, and I'm going to remind you what happens to girls who steal the spotlight. A collective gasp went through the room. The cameras, which had been focused on me, began to pan wildly, searching for the source of the threat. I held the phone up, my hand steady. I looked directly into the lens of the nearest news camera. This, I said, my voice ringing with a cold, hard clarity, is why women are afraid to speak. This is the voice that tells them to stay silent, to accept what's done to them, to be afraid of the dark. The room erupted. People were shouting, standing up, in the chaos. I heard Jax's voice in my ear. He's moving. Back exit. Aiden's team is on him. I ended the call. The silence that followed more deafening than the noise. I looked at the stunned faces of the committee. I had their complete, undivided attention. They locked me out in the rain because I said no, I said, my voice dropping, becoming more personal. Drawing them in, because I refused to accept that my dignity was a commodity to be bought and sold. That night, one person opened a car door and said, "Get in, I hear you." And in that moment, I understood something. Respect isn't a privilege to be earned from powerful men. It is the very foundation of the law. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then, a single person in the audience began to clap. Then another and another. Within seconds, the entire chamber was on its feet. A thunderous, rolling wave of applause that washed over me. A baptism not of shame, but of validation. The UCDW chairman, a man with a face like a bulldog, hammered his gavel. In light of this testimony and the active demonstration of criminal intimidation we have just witnessed, this council is voting for the immediate termination of all private port security contracts, pending a full, top-to-bottom federal investigation into the criminal enterprise known as the MOCB. The knot was cut. The legal machine, so often slow and ponderous, had moved with the speed of a guillotine. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights and outstretched microphones. Agent Aiden was at my side, her hand on my elbow, guiding me through the throng. We made it out a side exit, into a private parking garage. The rain had started again, a soft, misty drizzle. And he was there, Santo Madrigal. He was standing between two cars, blocking our path to the armored NFID vehicle. He was alone, his face a twisted mask of rage and desperation. The escape route Jax had seen him take had been a feint. He had doubled back. For me. He lunged, a folding knife appearing in his hand, its blade gleaming dully in the garage lights. He never got close. A shadow detached itself from the wall, Nero. He walked calmly out into the rain, shrugging off his suit jacket and letting it fall to the wet pavement. He stood between me and Santo, his hands loose at his sides. "She's not part of your game anymore, Santo." Nero's voice was low, flat, and colder than the rain. Santo screamed, a raw animal sound of pure fury, and charged. The end was a symphony of brutal efficiency. a high-voltage zit sound as Jax, appearing from nowhere, fired a taser that caught Santos square in the back. At the same moment, Nero spun, grabbing me, pulling me into his arms and shielding my body with his own as Santos' convulsing form collapsed onto the concrete, the knife skittering away. It was over before it began. No blood, no bullets, just a promise. Kept. Uniformed police swarmed in, cuffing the twitching, groaning form of Santo Madrigal. Agent Aiden walked over to me, her face grim but her eyes shining with respect. She ignored Nero completely, extending her hand to me in front of a dozen news cameras. "Thank you, Miss Linwood," she said, her voice loud enough for the microphones to catch. "Rainport owes you a debt of gratitude." I shook her hand, my own still trembling slightly. Across the garage, I saw Nero, already melting back into the shadows, a small, proud, impossibly private smile on his face. The sky over the greenhouse was clear, washed clean by the storm. The city lights below were a brilliant, sprawling galaxy. Nero had laid a thick wool blanket on the floor, and we were sitting on it, sharing a box of cold pizza. The silence was comfortable, easy. The silence of soldiers after a long, hard-won war. I leaned my head against his shoulder, the rough fabric of his sweater a familiar comfort. "I choose to stay," I said, my voice a near whisper, "but I'm staying as a partner." He didn't hesitate. His arm tightened around me, pulling me closer. "Partner?" He agreed. He tilted my chin up, and his lips met mine. It was a kiss of quiet triumph and infinite promise. It was warm and deep, and it tasted of a future I had never dared to imagine. The lights of Rainport glittered below. No longer a treacherous river, but a harbor. The memory of the rain was just that, a memory. The door that had opened for me in a storm had become the threshold to the rest of my life. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below to say hello and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories. Give this video a like and consider hitting that hype button to help this story reach more listeners just like you.